Skills are, in my view, one of the most important and probably one of the most underused features in the Claude ecosystem right now, and even arguably beyond the Claude ecosystem. If you're using Claude for anything serious, you probably hit this problem. You've got it working exactly how you want it for a specific task that has a perfect output. And then the next time you have a conversation, it's just forgotten everything. You could copy and paste instructions into the chat every time, and many people do this, but that doesn't scale. GPTs or Claude projects help, but they're not the same as it understanding a process for a specific task. And they fill up the context window far too quickly because you preload them full of so much information, so it has the information it needs to help you do a task. And so you're constantly running out of space in a conversation and having to start a new thread. The solution is skills. A skill is a set of instructions you write once and give to Claude. It encodes your process and your preferences. And today, we're going to go deep on them. We're going to go into the actual principles of context engineering and why skills are so important. The exact anatomy of a skill file with real examples that you can use today, and how you can make them, and how you can chain different ones together, and where to find skills and install them, how they fit alongside MCPs or plugins, and when you shouldn't even bother using them at all. This is In the Loop with Jack Horton. Hope you enjoyed the show. Before we get into what skills are, I think it's probably worth understanding the problem they were built to solve and kind of what they consist of. What is a skill? Because once you understand that, I think everything will start to really fall into place. So throughout 2025, AI coding agents were getting dramatically better and better. Claude Code could suddenly, build really complex systems. They could read an entire file system. They could interact with Git. They could run tests. They could deploy things. And the capability was obviously there to do really cool stuff. But what most people found is that they hit a wall. And that wall really was the context window. We've talked about context engineering before in July 2025. And it's the same for even those that are not using Claude Code. The amount of times you just run out of space, and this happens with GPTs and Claude projects. And what's actually happening here is that every time you want Claude to obviously know something, whether it was your, a team's coding standards, how an API works, the context of the market or the business you're working in, you basically be pasting lots of information into the chat, which essentially crams everything into the LLM's system prompt, which is this big long prompt that gets sent to an LLM that defines, its purpose, how it should behave, what it should do. And as agents and LLMs get more powerful, the list of things that is included in that system prompt is always growing. So there's more instructions, there's more tools, so the integrations it can use. So that system prompt is just ballooning. And the problem with that is that the context windows are finite. The more you stuff in there, the worse the agent starts to perform. It gets slower and more expensive, less reliable. And there's a real tension between giving an agent, as much information as possible and making it able to execute consistently well. And this insight is what led to skills. Agents don't need all of that knowledge and information all of the time. What they need is the right information, the right ability to run a process or awareness of a process at the perfect moment. And so in about late October 2025, Anthropic published a blog called Equipping Agents for the Real World with Agent Skills. And they framed it kind of like this. They said, Claude is really powerful, but real work requires procedural information and just organizational context. And as agents become more and more capable, we need more composable, scalable, and portable ways to equip them with that domain-specific expertise. And that's what led to agent skills, which essentially are an organized set of folders full of instructions and resources that help agents to basically discover and load the right thing at the right time. And I think the key phrase here is dynamically. So these skills aren't always there for the agent. They're not sitting in the context window taking up space. They only get loaded when they're relevant and stay out of the way when they're not. And that's a fundamental design principle of any modern day agent, really. Anthropic is a specific name for it that's been adopted everywhere, which is called progressive disclosure. So you progressively disclose more information that the agent needs, only actually when it needs it. So this progressive disclosure happens in 3 layers. Layer 1, when Claude starts a session, it basically preloads just the name and the description of the skills. So not the full set of instructions, just a one-line summary. Maybe 100 tokens per skill. So again, a few words. This makes it possible for the agent to know, I guess, what is available to it. We've just talked about this before, the tools that are available to this agent. And therefore it's cheap enough to always have those small descriptions loaded. Then you got layer 2, when essentially Claude encounters a task and recognizes that one of those descriptions is relevant, it then loads that full skill file. And as a result, it will have the complete rules and instructions that you create for it. But it only does it for that specific skill, not all of the skills. So again, you could give it 30 skills or tools, and it will only use one of them. So again, protecting that context window. And then you got layer 3. If the skill MD file references other files in the folder of templates or reference docs or scripts, Claude will actually be able to navigate to those as needed. It doesn't read everything up front. It follows it for references. So if a process that it's following says use this extra doc, it will then go and find that extra doc. It won't then load every single skill. Think about it like a set of instructions, basically. Layer 1 is like the table of contents. Layer 2 is that, relevant chapter, I guess. And layer 3 is the appendix. You don't need the whole thing every time. So now you understand, why we have skills, why they're important, and what they're kind of made up of. I think then let's build a skill together. And I think the walkthrough of this helps you really understand what a skill is beyond just me using kind of abstract words like instructions. Because I think it's really important to understand the mechanics and the specifics here. So if we build one together, right, you have to picture this. So let's say you write a team update every single Friday. And every time you ask Claude for help with this, you end up giving it basically the same set of prompts every single time. Keep it under 300 words, lead with wins, plain language, no weird AI slop language, end with the blockers. And every few weeks, Claude does something annoying. Maybe it'll add a random sign-off or use the wrong language again, and you have to then correct it. So here's how you would solve that with skills. Now, before I get into this is a few bits of a process here. I think it's also important to note that on all the Claude interfaces, you should have an option of just either having a skills creator or just telling Claude, create all of this process as a skill and review it and collaborate on this skill with me. So you can actually tell it to turn things you've been working on into a skill, then review it. But I think for the purposes of this discussion, it's still important to understand how to create one, because it will give you an in-depth understanding of what the heck this thing is. So step 1 would be create a new folder on the computer, call it weekly update. Or tell Claude to create a folder and call it weekly update. Tell it to organize it as it sees fit or it makes sense. Remember the Claude co-work episode we've done, I think, about 5 weeks back? If you haven't listened to that, I'd recommend also listening to that alongside this episode. Anyway, step 2 would be to go inside that folder, create a new file, and it's a text file. You name it skill.md, all caps for skill, then .md for the extension. Step 3, you open that file, and at the very top, you're going to give Claude 2 pieces of information. You name the name of the skill and a 1-line simple description of what it does, and that's it. Below that, you write actual instructions. For example, write a concise weekly team update following our style and format. Use when the user asks for help with a weekly update or stand-up summary or a team status report. Now notice that description. I've included a few trigger phrases: weekly update, stand-up summary, team status report. So this gives Claude multiple ways to recognize when this skill is needed. So if I then in a conversation say, I am writing this team status report, it would then pull up and use this tool or this skill. Step 4, you would then write the body, which is the instructions. So you call it a heading, weekly team update format, and then when asked to write or help with a weekly team update, follow these rules. And then you set the rules out. You can also have areas called structure, open with a section called wins of the week, containing 2 to 4 bullet points of complete work. You could have tone, so don't use AI jargon and weird corporate filler. Keep it in first person. You say length, keep it under 300 words. And then add a section called gotchas. So never use phrases like moving forward or synergy or circle back. Don't sign off saying kind regards because this isn't an email. This is going into a Slack channel. And that's what a skill file is. And the gotcha section is something Anthropic specific calls out as one of the highest signal content in any set of skills. One of the Claude Code team members actually wrote that in a blog post that the highest value thing you could possibly do is build up a gotcha section over time. So every time Claude makes a mistake, you can add to it. The skill becomes a living document that essentially accumulates your hard-won knowledge about what goes wrong and how to prevent it. So every time you're having a conversation with Claude, say, I want you to update the skill.md file for XYZ skill with these new gotchas. And again, you're just building up constant information and knowledge on this. And then finally, obviously, you save the file. So that means you've now got a folder called weekly update with a file called skill.md inside it. You can then install it, and this depends on how you use Claude. If you're using Claude.ai, so the web interface, you zip that folder up, not the file, the actual folder itself. Right-click the folder, compress it into a zip, and then go to Claude AI. And if you go into settings, you can actually go into customize and then skills, and then you can upload the skill using that zip file. If you are using the web interface, which I recommend no one do, you should be using the co-work interface or Claude Code. But if you are using that, you need to go and turn on code execution and file creation. Skills kind of need that to function. If you're using the Claude Code interface, it's really easy. You just tell it to do it and it will bash command it. It'll just set it up for you. Now, if you are adding organization-wise skills, you'll probably need to speak to your admin, but you can even tell it to make this a personal skill or a team-wide skill. If you're using Claude's co-work, which is the desktop interface, skills can come bundled in plugins or just upload them through the same settings panel as Claude.ai. As I said, Claude Co-work is the same agent as Claude Code, so you can basically ask it to just do it for you. And they've just released a new feature for most people called the Skills Creator, which just helps you create a skill. So yeah, once you've done that, every time you start a new conversation, Claude sees all the different skills that it's got available to it and its descriptions. That's that layer one. It costs almost nothing in context window capacity. And then when you say something like, here are my notes for this week's write-up or update, it will then load up that skill and it'll work. Now, really quick note here. It could probably be quite attractive to start turning everything into skills when that's just not necessary. So if it's a one-off task, just use prompts. If it's a repeatable task that you do a lot or you need other team members to fulfill, then you can make a skill. And when you write the skills, there's a trap. You don't need to reinstate what Claude as a baseline model already knows. Anthropic's guidance on this is really, really direct. So don't tell it how to write Python because it knows how to write Python. Don't tell it what good code looks like in general. Tell it what good code looks like in your specific code base. So again, it's about making it contextual and writing it out your process that you want this thing to follow. And then once you've built a skill, test it. Don't just use it once and go, oh, that was good. Use the skill creators evaluation tools, run the skill against different prompts, and then don't make it too prescriptive. So there's a difference between a skill and a template. Templates break the moment the situation changes. We talked about this last week, and you'll notice this is all about reliability and consistency. If you write something that is a if this, then that, it's going to be quite rigid. And therefore, if you need to be flexible, it's not going to work in the same way. So again, Claude and Anthropic are very clear here. It's about a skill, not a template. So yeah, that's how to make a skill and when not to make a skill. But I also wanted to talk about how to make skills extremely powerful. So if you imagine that's kind of like getting started, this is now moving into advanced thinking. Not because it's super complex, but because it makes such an extra impact on how you work. And that's skill chains. So yeah, the next level is when skills start working together. And I'm going to give you an example of 4 skills that feed into each other to form a complete development process, from a vague idea all the way through to tested ship code. And it came from a developer called Matt Pocock. And you might be thinking, oh, but I'm not a developer. Now, I'll also provide a couple of extra examples here about non-developer or product-focused tasks. So the first skill is called grillming. And I'll read it out in full because I think it's important to hear just how simple a skill can be. The entire skill body is 3 sentences. Interview me relentless about every aspect of this plan until we reach a shared understanding. Walk down every single branch of the decision tree. Resolve any dependencies between decisions one by one. And finally, if a question can be answered by exploring the code base, explore the code base instead. So 3 sentences, and that's the whole thing. And he's had sessions where Claude asked him 30, 40, 50 questions from that tiny skill before it was satisfied that they understood the problem. And you might be thinking, gosh, that's a lot of typing. But if you've not got Super Whisper yet, I recommend you to go and pay just a few pounds a month. I think they also have a free tier, but it's just an amazing, basically voice tool that you can press a shortcut, it appears, and when you're finished speaking, the text appears in any text box. It makes my life infinitely easier. But anyway, and then once the grilling is done, it'll invoke a second skill, write a PRD. So this is a structured multi-step skill, and a PRD is a product requirement document. So it's what people in product write before they build something. So Claude will then start to ask the user for a detailed description. It'll explore the repo to verify any assertions. It will interview. And once all this is done, this document's written, it will also submit this as a GitHub issue. So it actually raises it in the system of record to track work. And so what comes out on the other end is a ticket or an item of a task to be done with a full document, with a problem statement, a proposed solution, detailed stories in the right format, implementation decisions, and then it will trigger a third skill called the PRD to issues. That takes the document and breaks it into a series of individual tasks. Each task is essentially a deliverable piece of work that the team can work on. For example, it will start with what is most important to start on, usually the things with the highest risk to a project. The skill will also establish blocking relationships between tasks. So task 3 might depend on task 1, but task 2 might be independent and should be therefore picked up in parallel. So this is really useful if you're running many different agents at the same time. For example, this is what a product manager and a developer has to do. Finally, when it's time to implement, there's a test-driven development skill. So basically is a process that enforces and confirms with the developer what interface changes are going to be needed, agree therefore which behaviors we have to test, and then enter a loop. And you can't have that thing finish until it achieves those sets of behaviors that you are looking to actually achieve. So that's a very product-centric example, but the takeaway here for non-developers as well is that this principle of chaining works regardless of domain. So, and even that process we went through, you could build a research brief skill that feeds into a draft article skill that feeds into a format for newsletter skill, the exact same architecture, discovery, planning, execution. Each skill picking up where the last one left off. And this mechanism is domain agnostic. The instructions inside is what makes it specific to your work. Now, you might be thinking, gosh, that's really exciting, but maybe a lot to get started on here. Well, there are places for you to go and find other skills, bring them in and get inspiration. I will have one warning, which is obviously when you're downloading things from the internet that are just very public and inside a community, does present risk. So if you bring that straight into your environment that you're doing coding from or whatever it might be, you need to make sure that you're going and getting trusted, verified sources. So just a preface that super popular ones, probably more safe. But going on random websites and finding skills and downloading them will always present some risk. So anyway, Anthropic has got an entire skill set of a skill library, shall I say, on their GitHub repo. So github.com Anthropic skills. You know, there's skills for creating Word docs, Excel spreadsheets, PowerPoint presentations, PDFs. Beyond Anthropic, the community is massive now. There are curated collections on GitHub with tens of thousands of stars. There are directories listing thousands of community skills, and there's even growing ecosystems of plugin, particularly in Claude Cowork. And for those that don't understand the difference between skills, MCPs, and plugins, there's often a lot of confusion here. Think of it in 3 layers. Skills are the knowledge layer, so they tell Claude how to do a thing, so a process or a preference. A skill doesn't connect Claude to anything in the external world, just makes it smarter about a particular task. MCPs, so Model Context Protocol, are the connection layer. They let Claude reach out into your Slack, your GitHub repo, your CRM, your calendar. And plugins are basically the packaging layer. A plugin bundles skills, MCPs, other resources together that you can just then install in a single go. So instead of separately configuring a Slack MCP, writing a skill for how your team uses Slack, and then setting all of that up manually, you can just create a plugin that does all of that together. Skills are the brain, MCPs are the hands, and plugins, they're like the toolbox. And the best thing here is that skills aren't just an Anthropic thing. It was published as an open standard in December 2025, and since then it's been adopted by loads of tools like OpenAI Codex, GitHub Copilot, VS Code, Cursor, Gemini. They're all supporting the same format. It's one of the fundamental ways that we've built a lot of new functionality now on our product, aligning ourselves with that ecosystem. So yeah, let's conclude for today's episode, because here's the bigger picture. We're in this massive transition from using AI as a conversation to using it as a library of reliable, repeated capabilities. And every time you figure out how to get one of these things, these systems, these large language models to do something well, you can capture that knowledge so it compounds over time. And that's what skills are. Compounding information that you and your team can leverage over time. Skills turn one person's expertise into everyone's capability. Your best engineer's review process becomes a skill the whole team can run. Your best writer can be the foundation to how every person in your company writes content. So if there's one thing to take from this episode, it's this. The next time you find yourself giving Claude the same instructions the third time in a row, just stop and write a skill. We'll look to link everything into the show notes, documentation, skills repos, basically as much as possible for you to get started on skills. Anyway, that's it for me. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and I'll see you next week.